You run a giant conglomerate about to be expanded further by a big acquisition of Precision Castparts. And these businesses in your company operate in about every industry. You had a board of directors meeting in Dallas about 10 days ago, and you're entitled to tell why you had it in Dallas. What did you tell your directors about the health of the economy as seen by this huge block of businesses?
Yeah, well, to some extent they tell us too, because they're coming. We have reports on 8 big businesses. But the interesting thing about the economy is that you could give almost the same report ever since the fall of 2009. And it really has been growing, is growing at a couple percent a year, which is not bad, as we might get into later. But people have gotten more optimistic at times. They've thought about double dips at times, and then they thought it was accelerating. Our experience has been that certain areas have accelerated a lot, like autos recently, but the overall gain keeps running at about 2% per year, and that's been really quite steady, and that's what we see now.
And I assume that you see, how about housing? You've got big investments in housing one way or the other.
Housing's picking up. Our furniture stores are running at good gains. Our carpet's running at decent gains. Brick has picked up somewhat, but it's still slow. But overall, you just see a couple percent. I think the industrial area has slowed down a little bit. If you look at our cutting tools and that sort of thing, and they tend to be on kind of a real-time basis, because nobody loads up on cutting tools and thought there's going to be a big speculative boom in them or something. We just keep seeing a couple percent.
And is this disappointing to you? Or
not in the least.
Not in the least. You think it's good?
Well, let me give you a figure. People do get disappointed in 2%. The population of the United States grows at about 0.8% a year. There's about 0.5% from births over deaths, about 0.3% from migration. So that's 1.2% per capita you're getting if you're getting 2% growth by the time you take off the 0.8. You take a generation, and a generation now is much more like 25 years. People have babies later. That means in one generation, you're going to get, not even allowing for compounding, you get 30% gain in real output per capita. Now you start out, the US has $54,000 of GDP per capita. Take 30% more of that, that means another $16,000 per person in real terms in one generation. And if you take 2.7 people in a household, take 2.7 times 16 is 32 plus 11 is $43,000 of household GDP gain in one generation. It's mind-blowing. Our kids are going to live so much better than we live now. That's not so difficult in my family, as my kids will tell you. But the gains. Everybody in my neighborhood. I live in sort of a normal neighborhood, and everybody in my neighborhood lives better than John D. Rockefeller Sr. lived in the year I was born. And everybody in this country, in 2 generations, virtually everybody will live better than I live. Our country is a marvelous economic machine, and people talk about 2%. And they think that's kind of discouraging, but it's miraculous what compound interest does over time.
Well, you've now done, as you've always done in these sessions, you've expressed your faith in the U.S. economy looking out there. Now, I'm going to go back to the stock market here because I assume there might have been a little conversation at that board of directors meeting about the stock market. And I know you don't like to give predictions about the direction of the stock market, but what can you say to us? It's crazy. The stock market's been crazy in a sense. You don't think it's been crazy?
No.
Okay, well, right away, that's a starter.
No,
okay.
It hasn't moved around that. The stock market, the day-to-day movements are not that dramatic if you look over history. And the thing about the stock market, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars, a Great Depression, God knows how many recessions, flu epidemics, atomic bomb, you name it. The Dow Jones average went from 66 to 11,400. The stock market does wonderfully over time because American business does wonderfully over time. I bought my first stock in April of 1942. We were losing the war at that time. I mean, that was 4 or 5 months after the war broke out. And the Dow was at 100, you know. The Dow was at whatever it is now, 17,000. I mean, all my life I've heard people talk about how terrible things are. And, you know, you're hearing it in the political campaign now, you know, make America great again. America's great now. It's never been greater. And it's ridiculous. I mean, just compare how we're living to 20 years ago. Just think of what the internet does for me. And I'm writing an annual report. I want to get a fact here or there on something or the other. I used to have to go to the library or right away to some government bureau. You know, now I have it in 10 seconds. The world is changing all the time for the better, and it gallops. And in one person's lifetime, I'm 85. In one person's lifetime, real GDP per capita in the United States has gone up 6 for 1. I just imagine if you told my dad in the waiting room, you know, that your kid is going to see a 6 for 1 increase in the average GDP. I mean, he thought the country had already gone pretty far. They discovered the auto and the airplane and a few things. He thought there was nothing left to discover at that time. Right. You know, we found it all. And that's the way people always seem to feel. But this country, there's never been anything like it, and there never will be, and we're going to look back 50 years from now or 100 years from now and think this was the dark ages.
Well, let me switch now to a topic where some people would say we do not have an improved situation, and others would say we do have. That has the combined topic of corporate governance and activists. We have seen the number of activists rise. I think you might even start off with the thought that if corporate governance was better, we wouldn't have as many activists. Would that be true?
Well, if every company were being managed well, there certainly wouldn't be any reason for activists. There might still be a few, but there wouldn't be any reason for it. But the truth is that at some companies, the managers kind of forget who they're really working for, and you know, it becomes their own playpen. And at others, managements are sometimes incompetent. We're not saying often. And you know, it's the job of a board when that occurs to do something about it, and sometimes they don't. So there's a reason why activism makes sense. It's in certain cases. I don't think the bulk of activism relates to that. The bulk of activism just wants a quick hit. They want the stock to go up next week. And at Berkshire, I've always said we run our company for the shareholders who are going to stay and not the ones who are going to leave. And you know, the finest companies in America many times are selling at a discount for what they are worth that moment. When I bought the Washington Post company in 1973, bought stock in it, it was selling at 1/5 of what the properties were worth. Cap Cities at the same time was selling at 1/5 of what the properties were worth. They were both wonderful companies, but the whole market was depressed. And so anytime a stock is selling below what could be realized for it is not a reason to go out and sell the business. The activists want that to happen. And of course, they've attracted far more money for management. So what was a relatively small little industry 10 years ago has become a big business now. And you know, they're like sharks. They got to keep swimming. And so as they attract more money, they have to go after things. And they stretch for targets, and you know, you're seeing that. But there is a place for them in America. I mean, all American businesses are not being run in the interest of their shareholders with really capable management. And when that happens, change is needed, and sometimes boards do it, but other times they don't.
What is your own personal appetite for joining with the activists?
Well, it's zero.
Zero.
Yeah. No, I don't. My partner Charlie Munger told me 50 years ago. He says, if you want to guarantee yourself a life of misery, marry somebody with the idea of changing them. He said, you will be miserable the rest of your life. So I'm not really interested in getting into that. It's so much easier just to buy in with a bunch of people that are wonderful people doing it, you know, that have a common goal and join in the spirit of the whole organization. Right. So I'm just not looking for that kind of trouble.
Just to fill out that thought of Charlie Munger's there, didn't he also say that if you want to have a happy marriage, be sure to go in with...
No, he said if you want to have a marriage that will last. He said, right. He said not necessarily a marriage made in heaven, but he said just one that will last. He said, what quality do you look for in a spouse? Do you look for beauty? Do you look for brains? Do you look for character? Do you look for honesty? Do you look for humor? No. If you want a marriage that'll last, look for someone with low expectations. He's a very practical guy.
Now, a year ago, you made news at this conference by saying that Hillary would run for president, and furthermore, that she would win. Since then, a lot of water has gone over the dam, or maybe I should say a lot of emails have been stored in the server.
Gone over the server, yeah.
Some server, at least. What are your up-to-date thoughts about Hillary's prospects?
I think she is by far the most likely person to get the Democratic nomination. I think she is the most likely person to be president of the United States. And no, I think that, and actually I saw some odds that were presented a day or two ago on the probabilities.
What were they?
Well, I think she was 4 to 5, which was considerably better than anybody else on becoming president. I think she is the most likely person to become president. It's still a long ways off, but and you could have illness and you could have all kinds of things happen. But she's the most likely. The Democrats are most likely to win if they get turnout. I mean, in 2012, they did a much better job than they had historically in bringing out their base. And if they remember the lessons of that and maybe use the same people, the demographics keep moving in their direction. So, they're probably at least a half a percentage point better, maybe even a full percentage point, and that's a lot in elections, better off just in terms of demographics than they were 4 years ago. But they do have a good many of their base have a low propensity to vote. And so you need an organization that makes sure you get your share of the vote out.
Well, and how about the email controversy? Do you think that could maybe have been handled a little bit better?
Yeah, it could have been handled better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, by the way, I guess during this election season, you have really been had your time consumed by the fact that you're buying this big company, Precision Castparts. Have you really been bearing down on that, talking to the CEO and so forth?
Well, it's a big acquisition for us. It's $32 billion. I met the CEO on July 1st. I met him for about 10 or 15 minutes. He actually was coming in to visit a fellow in our office who owned stock as part of his portfolio. So I happened to be there. That was accidental. And I thought I'd drop in and just see what this guy looked like. And so I was there for the last 10 or 15 minutes. And when he left, I could tell that this fellow would be able to run his business a lot better if he were a private or under the wing of Berkshire. So I said to Todd, who had been in the reason for the visit, I said, why don't we give him a call? It was right afterwards, and say if he would like an offer from us, we would make one, but we wouldn't make it unless if he had any objection to it. And so we called him, and he checked with his board, and he said, fine, we're willing to listen to an offer. So I'd met him maybe 10 minutes at that time. Then he came up to Sun Valley, where I was at the Allen Company thing. I met him for about 15 minutes there. This fellow gets to the point very quickly. It's hard to make the conversation last. So I made him an offer. He said he'd take it to his board, and he got back in touch with me a little later, and he said there were a couple members of the board that thought it was worth more, and I said that was interesting, but we don't go up on price. So we made a deal in any event. I probably met this man who was outstanding manager. He's just our kind of guy. Mark Donegan's his name. And I probably met him maybe a total of 80 minutes now or so. I mean, we didn't get one piece of information. We do know due diligence. You know, my due diligence is to look into their eyes, basically. And we do know due diligence. We did not have a figure that was not public. The one thing I ask him is, if, assuming we treat you right, do you have any intention of retiring at 65? You know, because I'm totally dependent on him. He doesn't need me, I need him. And so I really have to know that. I usually have a judgment about that anyway, just from talking to him, yeah. I'm just actually, we own a company called Garan. Have you ever heard of Garanimals? Those of you who have young kids. The CEO of that company, which we bought it in 2002. He was 76 then. He's going to be 90 on March 16th. And I will guarantee you that he has not had a thought of retiring, this fellow that runs it.
And I know you feel good about
well,
that.
I like that kind of guy, yeah, right. Yeah, my thoughts on retiring are sort of a moving target, you know. I mean, Charlie's 91, he'll be 92 on January 1st, and he's my canary in the coal mine, you know. It's like
Well, I must say that people keep saying to me, now what can you tell us about the next CEO of Berkshire? And my first answer to them is, have you thought about the timing? I said, you've got to have a timing in mind. If you were to pick somebody right now, it might be X. But if it's 10 years from now, and I personally believe that Warren will be CEO then, unless he has physically or mentally declined, which I don't see any sign of, I said 10 years from now, that other guy might be completely worn out. Is it pretty true?
You ought to write a story on that.
Well, listen, I'm writing it in effect here by telling that. Well, now I want to come back to politics. The Republicans. How is this crazy contest for the Republican nomination going to turn out? And is it going to be settled eventually by what you and I grew up with, which was conventions at which it was left to be decided at the convention?
It could happen. It could happen. Back in 1924, I think the Democratic convention went 103 ballots. And the two people who got a combined 80% on the first ballot, neither one of them even ended up with the vice presidency. So really strange things happen at conventions. I don't know whether you've ever been to any, but
no, haven't.
They've changed in complexion over the years, but this one could change back. I mean, somebody could go there with a plurality, but not a majority. So it will be, I mean, this is something we haven't seen before, when you've got three non-politicians with an aggregate of 50% of the vote on the Republican side. And what we're really seeing in government right now, and I think it's manifesting itself a little bit in these debates and what's happening in the polls now. You know, we've always thought in terms of two-party government, but we now really have three-party government, and we're seeing that in the speaker selection. I mean, you may have them only calling themselves Republicans and Democrats, but there's a distinct party now within the Republican Party, and you have three-party government, and the traditional Republican Party has a plurality, but they do not have a majority. And that's something we really haven't come to grips with much in this country. We are not, in terms of culture, in terms of rules, in terms of a whole bunch of things, we have been set up for two-party government, and we don't know how to deal yet with three-party government, and that's accentuated by the fact that in the Senate, you know, they changed the cloture rule in 1975. There wasn't any cloture to speak of before that. So now you can have a majority in the Senate, but you still have a third party, which is the cloture vote, you can call it, needing to get to 60 votes for anything that's important. So we are actually dealing with a governing situation that before 1975 would not have existed in either house, and we're struggling with it. And to imagine that you can't find anybody who wants to be Speaker of the House, you know, is just startling to me. My dad was in the House of Representatives, I mean, and Sam Rayburn was Speaker of the House, and I mean, he was one powerful guy. And of course, the speaker is number 3 in line to be president too. So it's really, you're witnessing sort of a quiet revolution in terms of how America will be governed. And we may go back to the old system. We may find a way that we can get it back to 2 parties, but it is not a 2-party system now.
And do you have any anticipation of how it's going to turn out?
No, I don't, because you don't have 3 parties that are going to cooperate with each other. I mean, their differences are not really very negotiable. Now, it's a great spectator sport. I wouldn't want to be a participant, but I like it as a spectator sport.
Okay, this is going to be my last question. We're going to turn to questions from the audience, so you could be trying to attract the attention of somebody with a microphone. In the vastly decentralized operation that is Berkshire Hathaway, what happens when you have a subsidiary being run by a CEO not up to the job? How do you get that person out of there, and how much of a personal part do you play in the action?
Well, if you have 80 or so subsidiaries, they really all report to me, basically. And our batting average has been good about getting people. And of course, we don't get rid of them at 65. So I milk people for all they're worth.
Right.
I mean,
I know.
When you hit the junk heap at Berkshire, you're ready for the junk heap, believe me. I mean, Seymour is very safe in his job at 90 when I will. But occasionally we need somebody different. Sometimes they just aren't up to the job. Sometimes actually age is a factor, and that's very tough when age is a factor, because since we have no retirement age, when I go to see someone that's been a friend for decades and done all kinds of things for me, I can't go and say, well, we have this mandatory retirement age of 70 or something, and I'm sorry, I know you'd be good for another 20 years. It isn't true. I have to say, you aren't what you were before. I don't say it that way, but that's the message I'm delivering. I hate that. And so I always do it too late. I procrastinate. And I say, well, we got 80 companies of 79 are running okay, we can handle that. I come up with any damn thing I need to, to avoid the unpleasantness. But I do it myself, and it's usually not as bad as I think it's going to be. But the job is mine of making changes in management, and I would give a lot to not have that job, but there really isn't anyone I can turn it over to. We had one company run by a guy that Charlie and I both loved. I mean, the guy was just wonderful. We didn't see him very often. One of our managers I haven't seen for 10 years. He made me go on. There's probably some guy just say, what little figure should we send Buffett this month, But we had this one guy, and he was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. He done all kinds of things for me and Charlie. And he developed Alzheimer's. And we saw him very infrequently, and I think he sort of got himself up for the event, if he would see it. So he really ran this company with Alzheimer's for a couple of years, and finally it became obvious. But I really thought that was a pretty good test, that you should buy companies that are good enough so that a guy with Alzheimer's can run them. It's a new yardstick we have at Berkshire. I hope they fly it with a CEO someday, I'm talking up this new yardstick.
Now, ready for our first question from the audience. Over here, I think we got.
Good morning, Warren and Carol. Thank you very much.
Could you tell us who you are?
Hi, Kate Gutman from UPS. And I was curious, we spoke a bit about activists, and I wanted to get your opinion and maybe insight on what appears to be targeting of female-run companies by activists and what we in this room can do to combat that, because some very good efforts have been made, especially in the DuPont case, yet it seems like sometimes the odds are stacked again. So I'd love to get your insight on that.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics would be on that, but what the activists are really, they're after publicity, they're after results to some extent, and they're after attracting more money. I mean, these guys get paid very often on something that's a fee based on both assets managed, and performance. And if you can get 20 billion under management and you charge 2 and 20, the 20 really doesn't get to be that important. The 2 is $400 million a year. I mean, so attracting money is enormously important to anybody in the investment business, and different styles become popular from time to time, and as soon as they do, people rush in to say, that's my style, so that they'll attract management. Carol and I had a friend that described Wall Street in terms of the way it operates as having the innovators, the imitators, and the swarming incompetents. And essentially that's the way money attraction is. I mean, you know, hedge funds started out, they really didn't start out with A.W. Jones, no. But Carol made them famous for starting out with A.W. Jones. And once when people start assuming good results are attracted with a form as opposed to the ability of the person running it, but they think the form itself will create wonderful results, everybody's going to take that form. And in the last couple of years, a lot of forms have disappointed. And when hedge funds have disappointed, and so as forms disappoint, money runs around and investment people run around promoting some other form. And it becomes the flavor of the day because there's a lot of money out there and they're willing to pay a lot of very high fees for the promise of performance. And you don't really have to ever particularly deliver. I mean, just the promise will last long enough to get you rich and your children rich and your grandchildren rich. So it's nice if you perform on top of that. Right now, particularly in the last, I'd say 2 years, activism is a saleable form, and therefore it gets sold, and Wall Street sells it. I don't know whether there's been a picking on of female-run businesses, but I would say there certainly has been a picking on of really pretty decent and well-managed businesses because they run out of the other kind. You know, I mean, there's only so many that are being mismanaged, and that doesn't stop the people that have now hundreds of billions of dollars to invest in the farm. So I've had 1 or 2 friends that have called me about an activist surfacing, and I tell them, just say you're going to run the company for the shareholders, you're going to stay in rather than the one that's going to get out, and mean it and follow it, and don't try and do something that some little wrinkle here or there to supposedly satisfy them, because it isn't going to satisfy them anyway. And then I say, if you finally get desperate, send them over to Berkshire. I said, we love activists at Berkshire. It's just fun to joust with them and everything. And they're not going to get it. They're not going to get any place. So maybe, you know, maybe we could be sort of a rest home for activists. And of course, to go one step further, it's in Wall Street's interest to scare managements about activists. I mean, you've got both investment bankers and law firms that, you know, they're not dying to have an activist call on your door, but it doesn't cause them to break out in tears either, because you take them on and then they get all involved in the strategy, and it's their job to some extent to make you worry more than you probably should even worry. I mean, it's a commercial world out there, you know, in case you haven't noticed it. And there are a lot of companies that I hear about that are paying significant amounts to people to sort of strategize as to how to keep activists away. The best way to keep activists away is to perform reasonably well in your business and also to communicate well with your shareholders. I mean, in the end, you've got a bunch of owners out there, and on balance, they're going to be on your side. After all, they've got their money with you. But they should be treated as partners, and that's one thing we've always done at Berkshire and always will do. And I think well, I'll give you one illustration. We had a vote a year ago. Somebody put on the ballot that Berkshire should pay a dividend. They were kind of nasty about it. They said, well, Warren doesn't need one, but the rest of us do, so why don't we vote to have a dividend? And which was fine with us, so we put it on, and we did not campaign. And with over 1 million shareholders, our shareholders voted 47 to 1 against paying a dividend. Now that only comes through years of communication and explaining to them why dividends really don't make sense in our case at this time. And the shareholders will be on your side, but you shouldn't expect them to only be on your side when you're in trouble. I mean, you want to keep communicating. You really have to have a partnership attitude. And if you have a partnership attitude, I think it gets through to the shareholders.
Okay. Another question?
Over here.
Over here. Linda.
Good morning, Warren. Linda Addison, Norton Rose Fulbright. Last year, Carol Loomis retired from Fortune after 60 years and had to explain and defend her decision to retire.
She sure did to me.
Well, and that was what I was going to ask you. You have some very unique and refreshing views on retirement. Did you give Carol any advice, and did she take it?
Well, those are two different questions. Now, bear in mind that she gives me advice that I don't take too, so it's perfectly understandable that she would exercise similar rights. Well, I think it's a terrible mistake if you're in the kind of business where you can do it. I think it's crazy. It'd be crazy for me to leave my job, assuming I can do it. I mean, if I quit today, I see these people. They spend a whole week planning their haircut. I mean, that is not my idea of living. And I am fortunately in a business. My muscles are gone, my balance is gone, my stamina is gone, but it doesn't make any difference in what I do. So I'm very lucky that way. If I'd instead been a professional heavyweight boxer, which was my alternate choice, it would have been a whole different game. But this game, it really doesn't make any difference. I don't understand. I tell the students when they come to see me, I got 8 schools this Friday coming of 160 students, and I tell them, take the job that you would take if you didn't need a job. And that's what I've got. I mean, and you want to be doing something you would do if you didn't need the money. And most people do need the money, but if you're in the position where you don't, you should be doing what you would do if you didn't need the money. And I would rather do this than anything in the world. I'm having fun. I mean, my Social Security check is coming every month. I mean, I do not need this. But I do. Carol wrote the book, Tap Dancing to Work. I tap dance to work, and she knows I do. And there's nothing more exciting than to get there and find that some company you weren't even thinking about a week ago that you might buy for $32 billion and be in making aircraft parts. And it just doesn't get any better than that.
I'm not sure you answered her question.
About you? Well, I talked it through with Carol, and I wanted to make sure that she'd had a chance to, hear all the arguments, pro and con. But the thing about what she's done too, she can write if she wants to. I mean, she didn't. It was not that they took away her pen and pencil from her, And so if she wants to write, she can write, and she can write on subjects she wants to write on, and she can probably get them published anyplace. So writing is hard work, though.
And I still have the editing of the annual report.
No, that's true. She edits the annual report. So just correcting my errors probably takes 6 months of the year.
And the other 6, I try to think, well, why didn't I convince him? Isn't that right?
Well, I can see where it might be more fun. I mean, assuming you want to keep writing, even to start picking your own subjects at a point. I mean, you had a great latitude in doing that at Fortune, of course, but she had a very, very good job. If I didn't have the job I had, I would have liked her job.
And vice versa, I must say. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hers paid better, actually.
Okay, another question?
Over here.
We're over there in the back.
Over here. Warren, I am Joanne Bradford. I'm the COO of a company called Social Finance, SoFi. And we work in Silicon Valley in fintech. And I'm interested to see what you have to say about all the unicorns in Silicon Valley, and if you will ever participate in things like Uber, Airbnb. And there's a lot of discussion out there about the bubbles coming, the bubbles not coming, the VCs pitting against each other. And I just wanted to see what your take on that is.
Yeah.
And then for a bonus round, what would you do about the Syrian refugee crisis? Because I think it's important.
Well, I'm going to filibuster the first. We have never, that I can think of, bought into startups or anything of the sort. We love the fact they're occurring. We recommended Airbnb, for example, for our shareholders at the meeting this year just because the hotels were pushing so hard on price. So I love what they're coming up with, but I don't bring anything to that game at all. I mean, and the valuations tend to be, nosebleed by our standards. I want to buy very big, very solid businesses that I know will be around for 50 or 100 years, and buy them at a reasonable price, have a manager to run them, and then just go back to drinking Coca-Cola and and eating some peanuts or whatever it may be. So I have no ambition to be some venture capitalist, who's getting promoted on something that I wouldn't fully understand, and with the whole idea of a series of offerings all at higher prices and consecutive rings of offering. That it's just a game that doesn't appeal to me, but it's where a tremendous number of interesting things are going to come from. I would not be particularly good at that. I see Ginny here. Tom Watson one time said, "I'm no genius, but I'm smart at spots, and I stay around those spots." And so both Charlie and I try to stick with things that we feel we understand. We feel we understand this fellow with the airplane parts businesses. And we've been around enough so that there's a high probability we're right. It's not a certainty. But when you get into Airbnb or Uber, or maybe you go into Lyft instead of Uber, and I don't bring anything to that game that hundreds of thousands of other people might bring more to the game with. The Syrian thing, I don't really have a good answer on that. For one thing, I don't have all the facts by a long shot, but I do not want to tackle foreign policy. I'll take domestic policy, but not foreign.
And on that, I believe we have to quit because we're
Okay.
out of time. And Warren, as usual, we really thank you.
Thank you. It's fun. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh.